Ever had a fantasy that made you think, wait, is this normal? You're not alone. In fact, your so-called weird kink might be more common and healthier than you think. Stay tuned as a licensed sex therapist reveals the truth behind your deepest desires. But first, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss real talk about real intimacy. Lesson 1. Kinks are surprisingly common. When most people think about sexual kinks, they picture something fringe, taboo, or rare. But the truth, according to sex therapists and scientific research, is that kinks are far more widespread than most people realize. From light bondage to role play, feet fetishes to sensory control, these preferences are not only common, they are normal parts of a rich, diverse sexual spectrum. A major study published in the Journal of Sex Research found that over 60% of adults have fantasized about at least one kink-related activity, and nearly a third have tried it in real life. That means the majority of people you know have at least thought about a kinky scenario, even if they've never talked about it. It's not just other people or the folks on the internet, it's likely your neighbors, coworkers, and longtime friends. Sex therapists often compare kinks to personal tastes. Just like you might enjoy spicy food while someone else prefers mild, your sexual preferences reflect your unique experiences, personality, and psychological makeup. They are not inherently good or bad, they simply are. The problem is, society hasn't caught up. Many people still carry outdated beliefs from religion, school, or culture that frame anything outside missionary with the lights off as deviant. But those standards are artificial, not scientific. Kinks are part of the natural human experience. In fact, they've existed throughout history. Ancient texts from Greece, China, and India all describe sexual practices we'd call kinky today. From power play to sensual rituals, these behaviors were often seen as part of a holistic, exploratory view of sexuality, not something shameful. So when you feel curious about a kink, know that you're not stepping outside the human norm. You're actually stepping into a rich tradition of erotic expression. One reason people think kinks are rare is because no one talks about them openly. There's a sense of isolation, as if your desires are strange simply because they're private. But that silence is exactly what fuels shame. When you start listening to sex therapists, or even joining safe, respectful online forums, you quickly realize how common these desires really are. There's comfort in numbers, and you're not as alone as you might think. Sex therapists also emphasize the difference between fantasy and pathology. A kink is not a disorder. It only becomes a problem if it causes harm or distress, or if it's acted out non-consensually. But in most cases, kinks are just preferences, like liking jazz instead of pop music. No therapist is going to raise an eyebrow because you like blindfolds, dirty talk, or playful domination. They're trained to see these as valid and often healthy parts of a sexual identity. Understanding how common kinks are also helps reduce fear in relationships. Many people stay silent about their interests, afraid their partner will think they're weird or creepy. But the truth is, many couples have overlapping fantasies and don't realize it until someone speaks up. Once the topic is opened with sensitivity and mutual respect, it often leads to deeper intimacy and trust. The cultural shift is already underway. Mainstream TV shows, movies, and podcasts are beginning to explore kink with more nuance and less judgment. What was once taboo is now increasingly normalized, thanks in part to the work of therapists, educators, and brave individuals who share their stories. So if you've ever felt strange for being turned on by something off the beaten path, take heart, you're in very good company. Your desires don't make you broken, they make you human. Lesson 2. Fantasy doesn't mean reality. One of the biggest misconceptions people have about sexual fantasies, especially kinky ones, is that wanting something in your mind means you must want it in real life. But as any trained sex therapist will tell you, fantasy and reality are not the same, and trying to treat them as identical can create unnecessary shame and confusion. Sexual fantasy is the mind's way of playing, experimenting, and exploring boundaries without risk. Just as you might enjoy watching a thrilling action movie without wanting to be in an actual car chase. You can enjoy a dominant submissive scenario in your imagination without desiring real-world danger or control. In fact, for many people, the fantasy is more powerful precisely because it's not real. It allows full freedom of emotional intensity, power dynamics, and sensory detail, without the limits or consequences of real life. For example, someone might fantasize about being taken or overpowered in a sexual setting. But that doesn't mean they want to be hurt or abused. The fantasy could be about surrender, trust, or the thrill of letting go. Others might enjoy imagining taboo scenarios like public sex, role reversal, or playing with authority figures. Again, the appeal lies in the mental experience, not the literal one. According to sex therapists, this gap between fantasy and desire is healthy. The mind is complex, and sexual expression is one of the few places where people allow themselves to imagine without rules. What matters is not the content of the fantasy, but how it affects your well-being in relationships. If a fantasy excites you, comforts you, or relieves stress, and doesn't involve harm or coercion, it's generally considered perfectly normal, even if you never want to act on it. In fact, suppressing fantasy out of shame can backfire. People often try to force themselves into acceptable sexual scripts, avoiding the fantasies that truly excite them. This not only creates internal stress but can reduce overall sexual satisfaction. Therapists report that when clients are given permission to accept their private fantasies, even the ones they'd never say out loud, they often feel more confident, more peaceful, and more connected with themselves. It's also worth noting that many fantasies are symbolic, not literal. For example, someone who fantasizes about being punished may be processing guilt, exploring control dynamics, or playing with emotional release. These fantasies can serve as safe, imaginative ways to explore vulnerability or power without judgment. Sex therapists are trained to help people understand the deeper emotional layers behind what arouses them, not to shame them, but to help them connect the dots between fantasy and identity. Another point sex therapists stress is that fantasies are not moral failures. Just because something turns you on doesn't mean it defines your character. Our erotic imagination is influenced by countless factors: childhood experiences, cultural exposure, emotional needs, stress, even boredom. To assign moral value to every stray thought is not only exhausting, it's also unnecessary. Your brain is allowed to wander. It's what you choose to do in real life. With full consent and care, that matters most. Therapists often help couples navigate these differences. One partner may feel guilty about their fantasies, afraid their partner will think they're weird. But once a safe, judgment-free conversation begins, couples often find shared curiosity, or at least understanding. And in many cases, simply talking about fantasy is enough. You don't have to act it out to enjoy it. Talking about it can be intimate in itself. So if you're wrestling with a fantasy and wondering, what does this say about me? Here's your answer: it says you're imaginative. It says you're human, and it doesn't mean you want it to happen in real life. Fantasy is the mental playground where erotic energy roams freely. It's not a roadmap for action, it's a window into your inner world. And that world deserves compassion, not judgment. Lesson 3: Shame comes from conditioning. For many people, the hardest part about exploring their sexual kinks isn't the kink itself, it's the shame attached to it. That creeping sense of something's wrong with me can feel overwhelming. But what if that shame isn't really yours? What if it was given to you, taught, passed down, or drilled into you over the years? According to sex therapists, sexual shame is rarely born from your own truth. It's a result of conditioning. From early childhood, we're exposed to messages about what's acceptable when it comes to sexuality. These messages come from everywhere: family, religion, school, media, and culture. We're told there are good desires and bad ones, normal behavior and perversion. Anything outside the narrow script, like curiosity about dominance, submission, voyeurism, or role play, is labeled as shameful or even dangerous. These teachings don't usually come with facts or healthy explanations. Instead, they're packaged with fear, judgment, and silence. A young person might be shamed for touching their body, asking questions, or expressing interest in something outside the heterosexual, monogamous, missionary box. And once that shame is embedded, it's hard to shake, even decades later. Sex therapists often work with clients in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who are still carrying this inherited shame. Many describe feeling broken or guilty because of what turns them on. But when the therapist gently asks, "Where did that idea come from?" the person often realizes the shame wasn't theirs to begin with. It was implanted by someone else's belief system. Understanding this is powerful. It helps you separate your authentic sexual self from the outdated rules you were raised with. And this isn't just about religion or upbringing. Even pop culture has played a role. Until recently, most movies and TV shows treated kinky characters as villains, perverts, or punchlines. Rarely were they shown as healthy, consenting adults exploring intimacy with mutual respect. That kind of storytelling shapes how we view ourselves, and often not in a good way. Sex therapists explain that shame thrives in silence. The less we talk about kink openly and honestly, the more it feels taboo. That's why one of the first steps in healing sexual shame is simply naming your desire without judgment. Saying, "I'm into X, and that's okay," can feel revolutionary. It's a reclaiming of your own sexual story. And here's the truth: there's no one-size-fits-all definition of normal when it comes to sexuality. As long as your desires involve consenting adults and don't cause harm, there is no therapist in the world who would say you're broken. What's normal is a huge, beautiful spectrum, and your place on it is valid. It's also important to know that shame can affect more than your self-esteem. It can create distance in relationships, reduce sexual satisfaction, and even lead to mental health issues like anxiety or depression. That's why releasing shame isn't just good for your sex life, it's good for your overall well-being. Working with a sex-positive therapist can help you untangle the roots of your shame. They're not there to tell you what's right or wrong, they're there to help you understand what's true for you. Often, that journey leads to greater self-compassion, emotional intimacy, and sexual freedom. So if you've ever thought, why do I feel so guilty about this? The answer may not lie in the kink, it may lie in the conditioning. And the good news is, conditioning can be unlearned. You weren't born ashamed, you were taught to be. And that means, with time and care, you can also learn to let that shame go, and step into a more authentic, joyful relationship with your desires. Lesson 4. Communication builds sexual confidence. If there's one thing sex therapists emphasize above all else when it comes to kinks and intimacy, it's this: communication is everything. No matter how common or harmless your desires may be, they can't flourish in silence. In fact, the more openly and respectfully you communicate about your kinks, the more confident and fulfilled you become in your sexual life. Sexual confidence doesn't come from looking perfect or having all the answers. It comes from being honest with yourself and your partner, and feeling safe enough to express what you truly want. For many people, though, that's easier said than done. We're often taught that sex is something we do, not something we talk about. And when it comes to kink, already wrapped in layers of stigma, those conversations can feel especially risky. But here's the truth: your partner can't read your mind, and silence often creates more problems than transparency. A common scenario sex therapists see is someone secretly fantasizing about being dominated, tied up, or playing a specific role, but keeping it to themselves for years out of fear of rejection. Meanwhile, their partner might be open, or even interested, but never brings it up either. The result? Both people miss out on deeper connection and pleasure. Therapists teach that good communication starts with acceptance of your own desires. You don't have to act on every fantasy to share it. You just have to own it without shame. You might say something like, "There's something I've been thinking about, and I'd love to know your thoughts. It's a little outside the norm, but it excites me, and I trust you enough to share it." Framing the conversation around trust, curiosity, and care sets a positive tone. It tells your partner this isn't about demands or ultimatums, it's about closeness. And even if your partner isn't interested in the same kink, just having that open channel can build emotional intimacy. Often, what people crave most isn't the specific act itself, it's the freedom to be seen without judgment. Of course, timing and tone matter. Therapists suggest avoiding these conversations during or right before sex, especially if it's your first time bringing it up. Choose a quiet, relaxed moment where you both feel calm and connected. Use I statements, and avoid framing your desires as problems or confessions. Say, "I've always been curious about," instead of "there's something wrong with me." And remember, kink communication isn't just about desires. It's also about boundaries, safety, and consent. Talking about what turns you on should also include what you're not comfortable with. That's how you build trust. For example, someone might be open to light bondage but not interested in pain. Or they may love roleplay but want a clear stop word. These details matter, and talking through them not only prevents harm, it enhances pleasure. When couples communicate clearly about kinks, something beautiful happens: they start to see each other more fully. The walls come down, vulnerability builds connection. Even if they don't explore the kink, they often report feeling closer, more playful, and more accepted. This doesn't mean every conversation will be easy. Reactions may vary, but respectful dialogue is always better than hiding. And over time, these talks become less awkward and more empowering. They help you claim ownership over your desires, and give your partner a chance to show up with understanding and care. Sexual confidence isn't a personality trait. It's a skill, and like any skill, it grows with practice, patience, and honesty. You don't have to be fearless to start, you just have to be real. So if you want a more fulfilling sex life, don't just ask how to spice things up, ask how to talk about it. Because the bedroom gets a whole lot hotter when it's built on trust, communication, and mutual confidence. Lesson 5. Curiosity heals sexual judgment. When someone confesses a kink, whether it's playful spanking, role reversal, or something even more niche, the first reaction they often fear is judgment. That sharp glance, awkward silence, or dismissive laugh can feel like a dagger. But sex therapists remind us that the best antidote to judgment isn't shame, it's curiosity. Curiosity is the open door that turns discomfort into understanding. When you approach sexual preferences with sincere interest instead of criticism, You transform fear into connection. Curiosity says, tell me more, while judgment says, what's wrong with you? And the difference between those two responses can make or break a relationship, or someone's confidence. We're all wired differently. Our turn-ons are shaped by personal experiences, emotional needs, fantasies, even moments of vulnerability. What might seem strange to one person could feel deeply intimate or freeing to another. That's why sex therapists encourage people to lead with questions, not conclusions. Let's say your partner reveals an interest in being submissive. You might feel surprised or confused. But instead of reacting with instant assumptions, like, are you weak? Or does this mean you don't love me? Try this, can you help me understand what that means for you? Or, what do you enjoy about that dynamic? This kind of non-judgmental curiosity creates safety. It tells your partner you care more about their experience than your discomfort. And often, the kink has an emotional core that makes perfect sense once it's explained. For example, someone may enjoy being submissive not because they're weak, but because they spend all day making decisions and crave the relief of letting go. Others may enjoy mild humiliation in a sexual setting because it helps them laugh, feel unfiltered, or even reclaim past shame in a safe, consensual space. The point is, you don't have to share someone's kink to respect it. Curiosity doesn't require participation, it only requires compassion and a willingness to listen. When we stay open to other people's sexual landscapes, we often find that we learn something new about ourselves, too. Sex therapists often say that curiosity is a sign of emotional maturity. It means you recognize that sexuality is a vast spectrum, not a fixed set of right ways to love or desire. Just as some people like jazz and others like rock, some enjoy tender vanilla sex and others crave edgier exploration. Neither is better, they're simply different flavors of connection. Another reason curiosity matters, it invites growth. The more curious you are about your own desires, the more likely you are to uncover patterns, needs, or stories you hadn't noticed before. Maybe you realize that being dominant helps you feel powerful in a healthy, consensual way. Maybe you discover that wearing certain fabrics turns you on because of a childhood sensory memory. Curiosity helps you make meaning, and meaning deepens your relationship with yourself. Judgment, on the other hand, shuts doors. It says, this is wrong, before asking, what does this mean? And once judgment creeps in, people retreat, they stop talking, they feel ashamed, and the shame becomes a wedge that separates them from both their partner and their own sexual identity. This is why therapists say, be curious, even if something surprises you. Especially then, because curiosity builds bridges, while judgment builds walls. You don't have to say yes to every kink, but you can say, I'm willing to understand. And that one sentence is often more erotic, more healing, and more connecting than any sexual act itself. So the next time you, or someone you care about, reveals a kink, pause. Breathe, ask a question, get curious, because behind every desire is a story. And every story deserves to be heard, not judged. Conclusion. So, the next time you question your desires, remember this, your kinks aren't weird, they're human. From conditioning to communication, from curiosity to confidence, embracing your sexuality is a path to freedom, not shame. If this video helped you see things differently, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone curious, and don't forget to subscribe for more honest conversations about intimacy, pleasure, and personal growth. Drop a comment below. What's one lesson here that surprised you or made you feel seen? Thanks for watching, and remember, your desires are valid, and you are not alone.